Last week, Timnit Gebru was fired from Google while she was on vacation. Allegedly. Allegedly, she was fired because she co-authored a paper criticizing the environmental and social consequences of AI. Her firing illustrates a key dilemma women of color in tech face. Looking at her experience as a case study can help us understand the precarious double bind that marginalized people, especially people with multiple marginalized identities, face when they choose to work at a large tech company. This double bind is essentially, how much of my authentic self do I bring to work, and how critical can I be of my employer? Tokenization. One of the key findings from the One Friend Rule by Christopher W. Munn is, the One Friend Rule will thrive in a social group whose culture promotes a generalized value for diversity. Diversity programs elevate people of color, especially men, into token positions within an organization that are defined as higher status, yet are primarily symbolic and lack power. That is, when a culture generally promotes diversity, but doesn't do the groundwork of promoting equity and inclusion as organizational values, then the organizations that culture produces may have diversity, but marginalized people will tend to only have token roles, not positions of power. I didn't know Timnit. I don't know AI ethics researchers. Even though I work in tech, I don't bump into them in my day-to-day life. The reason that I learned about Timnit Gebru's firing is because of my network, my professional network and my online social network, and the network publics. The story of Timnit was immediately familiar to us. We knew tech has a diversity problem, that Google in particular has an inclusion problem. My cynical Twitter sphere sees through the PR responses, and often we see the patterns that marginalized people have to work twice as hard to get half as far. That the careers of marginalized people, especially the careers of women of color, are more precarious than their white counterparts. That when companies talk about ethics, they often do so as a preemptive defense against criticism, not as a critical business value. I heard about Timnit through the lens of tech feminist Twitter, and the takes and the dunks were good. But they also help contextualize the imposter syndrome minorities in tech feel. Part of why it is hard to be a marginalized person in tech is the sheer absurdity of how low the bar is for cishet white men, and still they trip over it. As the details of the Timnit Gebru story came out, we unsurprisingly learned that she was fired by a white dude in what appears to be retaliation for work critical of her, research her employer has invested heavily in. It's hard not to compare this case of a competent woman of color being fired with other prominent Google firings, like James Damore, who wrote a lengthy anti-diversity and generally misogynist memo, which eventually led to him getting fired and embraced as a hero of the alt-right. And while marginalized tech employees may engage in ERGs, employee resource groups, marginalized people should not confuse this benefit, this social resource, for labor organization. As Audre Lorde once wrote, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. What lessons can we take from this kerfuffle? 1. Find good allies and ask them to speak up on your behalf. 2. Recognize that your critical voice and perspective are valuable, even if this effective labor sometimes goes unrewarded. I'm Johanna Strand. This has been some thoughts on the Timnit Gebru firing, or why HR is not your friend. Thank you.